Hey, it's Amaria here, and in this video I decided to address the issue of lifestyle change. So how do you stick to a healthy lifestyle? I think this is one of the most frequently asked questions. It's one of the most important ones, if not the most important question of them all. So how do we make human behavior change successful? And that's a problem, I think, not just in terms of dieting, not just in terms of exercise, but in general. If you look at just simply changing human behavior, it's probably one of the hardest things to do in the world. And one good example of this, when this issue is really a problem, is let's say someone is diagnosed with diabetes, and if you look at all the actual studies on patients taking their medication, about 50% of people actually don't take their prescribed medication regularly or at all, which is a big problem, right? It's not just about diet and exercise, but it's a big problem in general when you try to change someone's behavior, make that change stick. And now the whole idea with the healthy lifestyle is, well, there's a whole subset of things that you have to do, and there's a whole array of behaviors that you want to change. And now that brings a problem, like how do you do this? Like what is the solution for the problem? And that's something I wanted to tackle a little bit in this video, to share a couple of my own ideas on this, and also what does the research say and some of the studies. One specific study that I want to mention here is a study done on 390 participants, when they actually asked them just, well, what made you stick to the diet? And they compared people who were basically compliant to Weight Watchers, and they were trying to lose weight with stuff like German recipe books and like all these fad diets that somehow put you in a caloric deficit without you knowing it. And what they found is that a couple of factors really played a big difference. And that one factor that I would like to discuss a little bit here is the factor of perceived complexity of the diet. And I think this is one of the things that is often overlooked, especially in today's age, of the whole information age, where we have all the YouTube videos, all the content out there. I'm guilty of this myself. When I was first starting out with exercise, when I first starting off with dieting, I was like, oh shit, I need to learn everything about this that is this, right? So I went to this Croatian bodybuilding forum, and I literally read every single thread on the main forum, right? It took me like a couple of weeks to go through the whole forum. I was reading like 4 or 5 hours per day, and I was like the most knowledgeable guy after 3 weeks. I knew everything, right? And that kind of knowledge that I had was simply theory, right? And that also created a problem because it made the whole issue so complex in my head. I was like, okay, there's this whole like protein synthesis, like you have to like, there's this insulin thing that's happening. It's like so much like all these things in my head. And I was like, shit, I don't know what the hell am I supposed to do, right? And that's a big problem, if you tackle something with complexity, especially if you're someone new to this, if you're going into, let's say you want to diet down to 10% body fat or lower, let's say if a guy between 15 and 18%, you never counted or tracked your macros, you don't know how to set up your diet, and this might seem very, very complicated for you, and it is complicated in the beginning because you still haven't reached that phase of unconscious competence, right? So in the beginning, there are a ton of barriers where people definitely fail, and at these barriers, when some people fail, turns into a whole identity of, well, this is not for me. That builds up more into that learned helplessness, as Martin Seligman says. You learn how to be helpless and things, and this basically is very toxic, it spreads into all areas of your life. And the idea really that I want to share with you guys today is a little bit about simplifying, right? So what are the essentials? Like what should you really focus on? And that's a big thing here, especially with dieting, especially with fitness and with all this marketing coming in, that basically puts your attention on things like nutrient timing, when should you eat your protein, when should you have your little snack, should you snack between meals, should you like do an 8-hour eating window, and if you do 8 hours in 1 minute, it's like all of a sudden it's like an on and off switch, so much black and white thinking. Also, like there's whole supplement thing, then there's like, well, super fancy workouts that are like high intensity interval training, burns this much fat and all this stuff, it's many combinations, right? So it really puts so much emphasis on things that don't matter, right? So you focus so much on these technicalities and these details where you miss the big picture, and that's a problem there, because especially if you're starting out, you're like, holy shit, where do I get started? What do I do, right? At the end of the day is like, what do I do? And people who have that perceived complexity and they perceive their diet as a lot of complexity, they didn't stick to the plan in the end. So I want to simplify things, and I would say that we want to look at things. I mean, Eric Helms had put this really great into a pyramid. I like to basically use the Pareto principle, you know, like the 80-20. So what is the 20% that gives 80% of the results? So for dieting, you know, we know that it's calories and macros. That's the 20% is going to give you 80% of results. So fix that first, and then worry about if reishi mushrooms or ashwagandha or some other supplement is going to provide you any health benefits, right? So first, fix the calories and macros, and then do that consistently for a couple of months before you move on to worrying about whether you should be taking a pre-workout supplement or not, right? So there's a really, really big distinction there between focusing on details versus focusing on the big picture. And how do you tackle these big picture things is really you want to look at what are the barriers that are preventing you from executing the habit on a day-to-day basis. So with dieting, so a lot of people will say, well, I'm the kind of person that cannot resist cravings. You know, I cannot resist a craving. And I mean, that might be true. That might be a belief that you have, but is that really the problem? I mean, if you look at it, isn't more of like a situation where you have a combination of environmental factors and all these other issues? Like someone says, I can't resist chocolate. Well, is that chocolate in your house? Is that chocolate present around you throughout the day all the time? Is that chocolate the chocolate that you're also buying and when you go to a shop? Is that chocolate that you're ordering in a restaurant? You know, it's not that the chocolate itself is really that addictive, but it's also your habits and your behaviors and your actions that are day-to-day basis where are organizing your environment around you, and that environment just basically reinforce that habit so much, and it's reinforcing it every single day. So some things that you really want to look at is what is surrounding you, right? Because you can automate your diet if the environment is really suitable to push you in that direction where you need to go. And that's a big issue. I mean, again, someone might say, well, I can't resist cookies. Well, the cookies are all the time in your fucking house. I can't resist cookies if I put cookies all around me. You know, we just moved in here into a new apartment. There's like our host actually prepared all of these things, and within 24 hours it was all gone. And it was gone because we're not used to actually having that much food lying around that is sweet and that is highly palatable, very delicious. So it was all gone, right? And the issue is that it's there, right? And that's the problem. If it's not there, we're pretty much not eating it, right? And that's the thing there. You want to look at the environment first before you start blaming yourself or before you start building up an identity or building some kind of excuse. What is really happening? You want to focus on the details when you're trying to fix a solution for the big habits that actually give you that big result. So the 20%, as I said, that gives 80% results in terms of dieting is really the calories and macros. So what is causing you to overeat your calories? Look at the specific behaviors day to day that are causing you to overeat. Like, where are you getting those calories in from? Like, what is the types of foods? What is the meal that you can know that for sure that you shouldn't be consuming that much in terms of quantity, that you know that you can reduce? So look into very, very specifics before you start saying, well, I tried a whole bunch of things and it doesn't work. Well, typically that's just the type of person that really isn't solution oriented. And speaking of this, I mean, as in any area of your life, if you want to be successful, you have to have the ability of really putting yourself out, like putting like that perspective out of your current like self and see where you're really focused on. But no, look for yourself from the outside, from a point of an objective reality. And when you look at yourself from the outside, you're not like, oh, what do I do? What's my identity? I don't know, what the fuck? I'm just the kind of person that fails. No, you're looking at, okay, what are the behaviors, like being very objective. So what are the behaviors that are happening on a day-to-day basis? What is the timing? What are the triggers? What are the habits that I fell into? And what can I change? And that, when you look at yourself from that far off, like from that zoom out perspective, you actually can observe your own circle of influence. And that circle of influence is a very, very powerful mindset shift that you get from, if you read some of Stephen Covey's stuff, he talks about that a lot, right? So he talks about having that circle of influence and really knowing what you can influence. And you can't know that if you're caught up in these day-to-day things, and if you're like learning to be helpless. You have to observe that from an objective reality standpoint. So somewhere, just be able to look at yourself objectively, or also another option is obviously to hire a coach who can do that for you, because the coach's job is to be objective and to analyze your day-to-day behavior and see where these changes could be made. So a lot of these things, they really stem down to day-to-day behaviors and changing small things, right? So these small things, they multiply, and you often have probably heard that people will say, well, I thought it was very complicated in the beginning. I'm sure you had experience with this yourself. I mean, even like if you learn how to drive a car, in the beginning you were like, oh shit, parking in reverse gear, like all these things. But then you become consciously and then slowly unconsciously competent, and that really leads to you doing it effortless. Like you don't even think about it anymore. And that's the same thing with dieting. If I speak to any one of my clients who's been working for me, with me for the last 3-4 months, they're gonna be like, well, shit, man, like this is so easy. Like, why is this so easy? Well, that's because you became unconsciously competent. Now you realize the simplicity of it, and you know that it's simple, but it's not easy, right? While beginners, they think it's complex, and they think it's easy, right? So they think once they master the puzzle, it's like when I figure out all this complexity, it's gonna be easy. Well, no, it is actually simple, but it is hard, right? So that's the distinction, right? Complex, easy, simple, hard, right? So once you figure that out, once you really break down all those small little barriers that are creating friction from you executing your day-to-day healthy habits, then it really becomes effortless. And one other point from that study, actually that 390 people study when they did the survey, is that self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, I think, is very, very interesting. It's basically your belief. If you've never heard about the concept, it's your belief in yourself that you can actually do this, right? So it's your belief that you can execute, that you can change yourself. And that's something that I found that is probably, for me, the biggest indicator of whether someone will be successful or not. So that's self-efficacy, so their belief in themselves. So if you believe that you can actually do it, you will do it. And if you don't believe, and if you have like certain limiting beliefs, it is very, very unlikely that this can actually change. And how you can build up self-efficacy, I actually made a video on this, which I'm gonna leave in the description below. But you can, to put it very simply, actually, if you break down a big habit, if you break down the lifestyle into a subset of small habits, and if you start conquering them, if you start baby stepping from one to another and just day to day, over time, that momentum that you built up just solving small little tiny problems actually converts into you having a massive momentum, and that leads obviously to increase of self-esteem, self-efficacy. Then if you actually come to a big barrier, if there's a big barrier, for example, you hit a weight loss plateau after you've lost 25 pounds, you're not the type of person who's gonna say, oh, fuck, this dieting thing is not for me. No, at that point, you're like, shit, I already lost 25 pounds, I know I can do this, I just need to figure out what I need to do to actually surpass the plateau. And that's a point where you see a lot of people, they actually fail, but their mindset is like as if they're just always one step away from failure. Like they're always one step away from giving up. And you've probably seen these people. That's the majority, right? If you're watching this channel, if you're watching this video, you're among the 1 to 3% that are actually willing to invest the time into figuring this out, into learning about fitness, about nutrition, about changing your lifestyle. The other 97, 99% of people, they're like, holy shit, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a try, and probably I'm gonna give up because it's not for me. And most people don't even believe that they can change, right? So give yourself a little bit of props for that. But going back on topic, simplicity is really where the root is if you're looking for successful habit change. Like simplicity is the key. That's why low carb diets do tend to work with general population, because you tell them, hey, shit, man, just don't eat any carbs, they tend to work better, because all of a sudden, the person is like, oh shit, I just eliminate all the carbs, carbs are the bad thing, and all of a sudden I lose weight, right? It doesn't matter. They don't know, and they don't need to know that they're in a caloric deficit. It often works because they simply automatically enter a caloric deficit. They increase their protein because you don't eat any carbs. You're most likely going to increase your protein, and then in the end, you're going to lose some weight. It works temporarily, obviously, because if you don't have the general understanding, you will eventually have to hit a roadblock. But the point is, it does work because of its simplicity. That's one of the reasons. Obviously, the other one is the protein intake and all the other factors there. But the idea is that attracts people in the beginning. That's why people are often attracted to fad diets, to fad plans. In terms of exercise, if someone tells you, well, just do this these 2 exercises and that's all you need, you know, that's very, very attractive. Or if someone says, hey, you only need to exercise 3 times a week with like 5 movements, you're going to be more attracted to that than if I tell you, well, look, that's one approach and that might lead to certain results, but if you want to get more results potentially within a specific context, you might need to do 6 times a week or 5 times a week or 4, right? So complexity is definitely the enemy, and you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of complexity in the beginning. And that's the message of this video. In the beginning stages, you want to make sure that you baby step from simplicity to complexity, so you understand that it really is simple, but it is just simply hard to stay consistent with it. And that's the big idea from this video. Instead of trying to overwhelm yourself with too much knowledge, too many things to do, that's not gonna basically lead to a good outcome in the end. And as I said there, I mean, I mentioned that diabetics, that they don't take 50% of them don't take their medication. There was an interesting study done on people who had heart bypass surgery. You know, they asked these people who were literally dying, they were dying and had surgery. They didn't stick to their behavioral change at the end. They didn't stick to eating a healthier diet. They didn't stick to taking their medication, even though they had to operate on their heart. They're probably gonna die if they don't do that, but they still don't do it. Even if faced with death, people are so horrible with changing their behaviors. I wanted to change, I mean, push out a little bit of raw ideas here in this video toward your end. I mean, let me know in the comments below how you resonate with this. And aside from that, I would love to hear what is your favorite way that you found that you stick to your diet the best. So keeping it simple in a way, maybe with intermittent fasting or some other approach that really allows you to have that simplicity with hitting your calories and macros. What are some of the tricks that you played on yourself, on your own mind, to actually make this work, to make it stick? So let's consider this video a little bit of a survey where we can actually see what works for someone, so we can exchange all these good ideas. Aside from that, make sure to hit that subscribe button below to support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.